Continuing on with the cardiovascular system, we've already covered the heart and the blood vessels. So our last topic to cover is going to be the blood. Now let's try and guess how much blood we have in the average adult body. Turns out to be about 4.5 liters. So just to kind of give you a gauge of what 4.5 liters is, imagine a 2-liter soda bottle, and it's 2 of those. It tends to be about 4 in women and 5 in men, just because of pure size. The functions of blood. You might notice this slide from the very first video. Notice the functions of blood are very similar to the functions of the cardiovascular system as a whole. Transport, defense or protect, and regulate. So again, share those same exact functions that we've already discussed with the cardiovascular system. So blood consists of 2 main groups. One is called plasma. Plasma is about 55% of your overall blood, and it contains actually mostly water. Of that 55%, about 90% of it is water. In that is also nutrients, certain things like oxygen might be in there, some vitamins, some minerals, waste, so things like carbon dioxide, and proteins. The other part of blood is the formed element. These are the cells. So the cells consist of about 45% of the overall blood. So if you were to look at your overall blood and separate it out, you see this is all the plasma on the top, about 55%, and then the formed element, which are the blood cells on the bottom, about 45%. The blood cells come in 3 varieties: red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. So the red blood cells are right here, and that's actually about 45% of your overall blood. So actually most of the formed elements are red blood cells. And if you look at your blood under the microscope, right, and you see a blood smear, what they call, you'll notice that most of the cells you saw were red blood cells. Very rarely did you see the white blood cells. In fact, white blood cells is less than 1% of your overall blood. And then platelets are not as common either, only about 1% also. Sorry, less than 1%. So let's go through and talk about each one of these cells. The red blood cells, also called erythrocytes. Remember, cyte means cell, and erythro is for red. So the function of red blood cells is to carry oxygen. And how it carries the oxygen is through this protein called hemoglobin. This protein, hemoglobin, contains iron. And so that's actually why it's really important to have enough iron in your diet. You don't want an iron deficiency, because without the iron, you actually won't be able to bind to the oxygen. So red blood cells carry oxygen, and how they do that is the oxygen binds to the iron is on the protein called hemoglobin. So this is actually a picture of a hemoglobin blown up, and these little red balls here are the iron. So when oxygen binds to it, that's what actually gives the red blood cells the bright red color. So each red blood cell is going to have probably about 250 million hemoglobin, so quite a bit. In addition, the hemoglobin, once it releases the oxygen, it can actually pick up and bind to carbon dioxide also. So it can transport both of them, not at the same time, one or the other. A little bit about red blood cell production. It's produced by bone marrow, and you can find bone marrow, for instance, in your sternum, in your hip bone, in your arm bone. Red blood cells, interestingly, don't have a nucleus. The reason why they don't have a nucleus is because nuclei take up a lot of energy. In fact, red blood cells don't even have that many organelles because they take up so much energy. And when you need energy, you're actually going to need to use oxygen. So to get energy, the process you might remember is to breathe in oxygen and eat the food. That's going to provide the energy. But remember, the red blood cell's job is to carry oxygen. So if it needs a lot of energy for a nucleus, it's going to need a lot of oxygen, which means it's going to use all the oxygen it's carrying. So it won't actually even have any left to deliver. Therefore, the red blood cell actually only going to live about 120 days, so roughly up to about 4 months, and then it's going to die off. Since red blood cells die so often, we need to constantly reproduce it. And to reproduce it, we need to use the hormone called EPO. That's short for erythropoietin. Erythro for the red blood cells. Poietin is to make. And this hormone is actually released from the kidney, which filters all your blood, so it can actually regulate and say, hey, I need to make more blood cells. So you release the hormone to make more red blood cells. So once they figured this out, it's actually really powerful, because then you can actually inject the hormone erythropoietin to increase the production of red blood cells. So there's this interesting concept called doping that athletes have actually picked up on. So here's what happened. The athlete will actually either drain some of their blood. So actually they drain some of their blood, and then their body will say, hey, look, we need more red blood cells. So they'll naturally produce more EPO, erythropoietin, which will cause the production of more red blood cells. Then they can actually reinsert the red blood cells that they drain back into their blood. So now they have more red blood cells than a normal amount. And the reason why that's advantageous is go back to the role of the red blood cells. What do? They carry oxygen. If you have more red blood cells, you can carry more oxygen. Remember, the more oxygen you have, the more energy you can make. So the athletes are gaining more energy by having more red blood cells. In some particular cases, they can actually just inject EPO directly and increase their red blood cells. So again, this is called blood doping, and it's actually illegal. It became so common that the international agencies regulating sporting events, like for the Olympics, made doping illegal. One disorder I wanted to mention to you guys is sickle cell anemia. This is actually a genetic disorder where there's a protein in the red blood cell that's mutated, and it actually causes your red blood cell to have this sickle shape right here instead of a nice healthy round shape. So think about how red blood cells can carry oxygen. If it's in this nice healthy round shape, it can carry a lot of oxygen. There's a lot of surface area for it. In the sickle cell shape, unfortunately, it can't carry oxygen that well. So it's not as efficient, no oxygen, no energy. People with sickle cell anemia end up being pretty tired. In fact, anemia in general is just a lack of red blood cells, which people who are anemic might get tired easily. And this is one form of sickle cell anemia. One form of anemia, which is sickle cell. Let's now talk about the white blood cells. White blood cells are also called leukocytes. Again, cyte is for the cell and leuko is for white. The main goal of the white blood cells is to fight infection, so they're actually part of the immune system. So we'll see white blood cells again when we talk about the immune system. Now, there's actually quite a few different types of white blood cells. There's 5 major categories, and they all help fight different antigens. Antigens are the foreign harmful substances that invade your body, like harmful bacteria or viruses. The reason why we need so many different types of white blood cells is because, of course, there's so many different types of diseases out there. So each of these white blood cells that you're going to see here are going to specialize in something slightly different. We won't have time to go into the details of all 5 of them, but just know there's a diversity of them. And if you look inside, you'll notice all of them have nuclei in them. And if you were to look at a blood smear or blood slide under the microscope, you can easily detect the white blood cells because you're looking for the nucleus, which often stains purple. Again, those red blood cells did not have nuclei, and they were all identical. The white blood cells are going to vary a little bit, and they're all going to have very noticeable nuclei. Some white blood cell disorders, one is called SCIDS. It's severe combined immunodeficiency syndrome. And kids who are born with SCIDS were often nicknamed bubble boys or bubble kids. And here is actually a picture of a baby boy who had SCIDs, and they put them in a bubble because essentially what happens is their immune system is almost non-existent due to a lack of white blood cells, lack of healthy white blood cells. So they put them in these bubbles to protect them from any type of disease or bacteria they could be exposed to. Another white blood cell disorder is leukemia. Leukemia is cancer of the white blood cell. In any cancer, what happens is you actually have an overproduction of cells, too much. Too much cells is a tumor. So here's normal blood, and you guys might remember from looking under the microscope, notice again it's mostly red blood cells and with very few white blood cells scattered in there. In leukemia, notice the number of white blood cells. There's a lot more. So initially you might be thinking, well, what's the problem with that? White blood cells are good. They are part of our immune system. They help fight disease. The problem with the white blood cells in leukemia is that they're abnormal. So even though you have a lot of them, they're dysfunctional. So they're not working well, and they'll interfere with your healthy white blood cells. You won't have the healthy white blood cell. All right, our last cell type are platelets. Platelets are also called thrombocytes, and their main job is to clot your blood, basically to stop your blood from bleeding. So let me show you how this works. So let's say you have a blood vessel, right, and it's punctured. For instance, you get a skin cut, right, and you start to see the bleeding. The platelets are going to be the first to come, and you'll see right here they're really tiny. They're much tinier. Here's a red blood cell. Much tinier are these little platelets. They're actually fragments of cells. They're not even complete cells. So they're going to form a plug. They're going to plug up where the blood vessel is punctured. But that's not enough to actually repair the blood vessel and keep the blood clotted. So next, a series of enzymes are going to help. It's a whole cascade, so a whole bunch of steps of enzymes that are going to work together to finally get what we call fibrin. Fibrin is a protein, very thread-like, so you can see it all in brown here. The fibrin threads form this nice little network, and they're the ones that ultimately end up trapping the red blood cells. So this whole process is initiated with platelets, but then ultimately is finished off with the fibrin threads. So think about how long it takes for this process to occur. Of course, it depends on how bad the cut is, but if you have, for instance, like a simple paper cut, hopefully it'll stop bleeding in the order of minutes, right? Maybe 3 to 6 minutes. So this happens pretty quickly. But there are disorders when your blood can't clot regularly, and one is hemophilia. In hemophilia, you don't have some of those enzymes that allow you to get that fibrin thread and form that final network of clot. So I've got this little picture here. A bandage is not enough, so it's not like you're gonna band-aid it up and be fine. The problem with hemophiliacs is that they'll just keep bleeding and bleeding. So oftentimes they need to be supplemented with those enzymes that can help the platelets form the ultimate clot. Another disorder that's associated with platelets actually is heart disease. So you only want clots to occur when you have, for instance, a specific cut in a blood vessel. But sometimes the platelets can actually start to congregate around damaged blood vessels. For instance, in atherosclerosis, in those scenarios, you get these buildup of blood and they start to clot. One thing you can use actually is blood thinner, such as aspirin. So what aspirin does, it actually inhibits the platelets, so inhibits the formation of these clots that you don't want. So these are, again, bad clots that, for instance, can block the passage of blood to the head for a stroke or the passage of blood to the heart for a heart attack. So just to sum up, blood functions to transport, defend, and regulate. Blood consists of plasma and 3 cell types: red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. And there are several disorders of the blood.